So water in your basement, every homeowner's worst nightmare. Well, maybe not the worst, but definitely up there. And particularly for Winnipeggers this year, there's going to be a higher probability that you are getting water in your basement. So when you start to see the evidence of that, what we're going to talk about today is things you can do to mitigate the risk of having water in your basement, and then also what to do if you get water in your basement this year. Stay tuned. Now, just a few words before we really get into this, just because you need to understand what the precipitating factors are in this potential risk for a lot more water in basements this year. The first thing that is working against us in terms of getting water in our basements is that this past winter we have seen record snowfalls. I think this was the third highest snowfall on record and at the time of filming, and we are getting predictions that more snow is actually coming. So the last time we saw snow levels at this level though was 1997, and we all know about what the flood of 97 looked like. So just kind of some background going into one of the precipitating factors. Another factor is that Manitoba houses are built on sand, silt, clay. We don't have bedrock that we are building our houses upon here. So what that means though is that our soil is constantly moving, even around our houses. I know that kind of sounds scary, but what that also means is in a very dry summer, like the summer we just experienced in 2021, what you'll notice is some of that dirt and whatnot around your home starts to kind of shrink and pull away from the foundation. And if you've walked the perimeter of your home, you might notice if you look up against your foundation that there can be like a 1-inch gap between your house and where the dirt starts. Now keep in mind, these are little air pockets that have now formed. And where does water like to go? To the lowest lying area. So if your grading isn't great, if you have these air pockets, the snow is going to be sitting against your foundation this year because it did blow in from all directions too. So I have yet to see a foundation this year that didn't have snow resting against it. But it also gets into those little air pockets that have formed as a result of the dry summer we had. So now fast forward a few months. Spring is coming, hopefully soon this year. We need it. But if you have that snow that's just been sitting against your foundation and we start having this very rapid melt, which some years we do see where there's temperatures for days in the high teens, that water is melting, and it's melting quickly, and it might not have anywhere to go. It doesn't help either that our homes are always emanating heat. Snow that's sitting against your foundation does tend to melt even faster than the surrounding snow. And that water is going to look for the path of least resistance. And if that is up against your foundation, sinking into those cracks of dirt or air gaps, I should say, then water is going to be resting right against your foundation, just waiting to wreak havoc. Sometimes water can penetrate through the snap ties, the old rusted out snap ties that were used in the formation of the foundation itself. Or other times you might notice that it's coming up from what seems to be your floor, and there's actually good reason for it. The foundation walls of your home and the basement floor slab are actually not one unit. When builders are building a house, they build the structure, which is your walls, on footings, and that is to essentially stabilize them and hold them in place. However, in Manitoba, because our soil and our ground move, the slab is actually a little bit more floating, even though it doesn't seem like that. It's concrete, right? But they're not sealed perfectly. So water can come up in that area where the slab and the wall actually meet. And that's actually fairly common, especially if your weeping tile might not be functioning properly, either because it's clogged or because it was a fast melt, so it's still kind of iced up and getting some ice damming in there. So yes, I've prepared you as to why there's a high probability there's going to be a lot of water sitting around foundations this year. But there are also some things you can do from a preventative side to mitigate the risk of really having that water in your basement. First thing I would recommend is don't panic. A lot of the time, the normal assumption people have when they start seeing water infiltration in their basement is that their foundation has a crack. And while that could be the case, if there has been a lot of movement in the ground around your property over the last year, and just maybe other evidence throughout the home, it's not necessarily going to be the case. Because of these factors, the water that's sitting against your foundation this year, there's a good chance that it could also be coming in through other means. So don't panic and start tearing your basement apart right off the hop. Prevention is going to be the name of the game this season. So what that means is really shoveling snow away from your foundation. I know we are all so sick of shoveling after the amount of snow we've had this year, but as we get to those warmer spring months, you're going to want to shovel that snow away from your foundation as best you can. There's also pumps out there that you can purchase. Obviously, if it's still going freeze thaw, you don't want to let them freeze up and break. But once you start to see those higher temperatures and more puddles forming, there are actually pumps similar in theory really to a sump pump that you can get for the exterior that connect to a garden hose, and you can just pump that water away from your house down to the front street even, or to a lower lying area of your yard away from your home. Another area that I'm seeing a ton of snow in this year are window wells. If you're selling your home, you should be clearing out your window well, because the homes with tons of snow in those window wells, they're super dark and creepy in the basement. But secondly, when that snow starts to melt, the window wells are often connected to your weeping tile. But again, those pipes can freeze. So if they're still frozen when the window well snow starts to melt, what you're going to find is that water has nowhere else to go but through your window. Depending on the age of your home, you might also want to reach out and contact a plumber preemptively just to look at getting your weeping tile inspected and flushed out. So if you're not familiar with home construction, really what weeping tile is it's kind of this tubing that's under the ground at the below grade, right where your foundation kind of starts on your home. And it's kind of these tubes that run along and the perimeter of the home, and then they connect in a central fashion inside the home through your main drain, and then they get the water out through the city that way. It's all just to direct water away from the foundation in the ground in your home. I feel like I really might have explained that in a wrong way, but essentially it's a water removal system that's going on underground just outside your home and right against that foundation. So what happens a lot of the time, depending on how low the frost line goes, is that weeping tile can freeze or have ice enter it and then it gets jammed up. But also what can happen over the years is sand, silt, clay can enter into that weeping tile too, which means that it gets clogged up and perhaps isn't functioning properly. Now, an easy kind of check for you to do if you just want to see if it appears to be functioning properly is go down to your basement when things are melting and you know there's water kind of in the area. Lift up that main drain, and what you'll be able to see are kind of the different incoming lines to your main drain, and those connect to your weeping tile. Do they look damp? Does it look like water is moving through that system? Then that's a good sign that it's still functioning properly. Although it still wouldn't hurt to get those lines snaked. However, if you are pulling up that sewer line, or not sewer line, main drain line, and you're looking at the weeping tile and it looks completely dry and you know things have been melting around you, it might be a good indication that there's something blocking your weeping tile and that you might need to have that inspected further. So always a good idea to call a plumber, get them to come out, snake those lines and kind of do an inspection. They have those cameras now that they can do so, because then you at least know that your weeping tile is functioning properly. The next thing you're going to want to test is your sump pump if you have one. A lot of homes won't have them. Really, we didn't start to see them in heavy use until the 90s, although there's a lot of 80s houses. And then of course there's some homes that were retrofitted with sump pumps, as there were some grants given by the city a few years ago, and I noticed a kind of uptick in older homes getting sump pumps. But if you do have a sump pump, now is a really good time to make sure it's functioning properly. and keep a close eye on it in those summer months. It is not uncommon to hear about a sump pump burning out, especially in a spring like we're about to have, where it's likely going non-stop, pumping that water. You're going to want to keep a close eye on it. There are alarms that you can actually get so that if the level of water rises above a certain point within your pit and the sump pump for some reason doesn't kick in, then it notifies you, which might be a good idea this year, because I honestly think that these sump pumps are going to be going non-stop. Another thing that you're going to want to check in relation to your sump pump is that the hose, you're supposed to disconnect it in the winter. Hopefully you did. If you didn't, sometimes they can crack or really cause some jamming because all the ice that forms right around that exit point. So A, you're going to want to check that hose. Hopefully it was off and now you can reconnect it. And B, you're going to want to make sure that that hose is at least 6 feet away from your foundation when it's draining the water, and that it's directed in a downward area from your home. Essentially, you just don't want to be repumping that same water through your sump pump again and again, because then it's just going to burn out, but it's not really productively doing anything if that water is just being pumped out right near the foundation again. So you've done all of these things, but perhaps water still enters into your basement. Just know that's okay. It's likely happening to a lot of homeowners out there this year. But there's still some things you need to be proactive about if water is entering your home. Now, the biggest concern really becomes mold. If water is allowed to sit somewhere and mold starts to form, that can be a huge issue because mold is not easy to get rid of, and especially once it really starts expanding. So initially, if you start seeing water come into your home, the best thing you can do is try and keep the area as dry as possible. So you might want to invest in a dehumidifier if you don't have one already. Get some fans going in the area. Try and dry things out as quickly as possible. If you're noticing though that water is sitting for extended periods of time, it might be time to start pulling off some drywall or wood paneling, depending on your basement, just to let the concrete and the insulation and everything dry out. You really, really, really do not want to foster this environment for mold growth because it's far worse than the water itself, that mold. And of course, if you think it's something worse than just typical seepage from spring melt on a year where we've had this much snow, always reach out. We're always happy to give recommendations for foundation repair specialists if you need that information too. There are additional items that you can do to waterproof your exterior membrane of your home, and there's even options that can be done from the inside of the home too. So just reach out. We're always happy to provide recommendations, but hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully if you get to the point where there's so much water coming into your basement that you do have to tear things off, where what you're going to discover as you're opening up those walls, hopefully, is that there aren't cracks in the foundation, rather it's other areas that need to be addressed. The next thing I'm going to recommend is paramount to preventing water infiltration in future years into your home. And it's something that's so easy, yet none of us do it. I'm guilty of not having done it. My home right now, I think we've tackled it, but it's not something we've been super consistent with over the years. But what I'm talking about is grading. And when I say grading, all that I really mean is the grade of the ground as it moves away from your property. So good grading means that the property will usually drop about an inch for every foot you move out away from your home. Ideally 6 feet, so 6 inches higher at the home, and then as you pan out 6 feet away, it drops a whole 6 inches. That is the best practice and what the home inspectors recommend. And when we say building up grade, we mean adding like clay soil, whatnot, to get that water moving away. It's very easy work. It's just, I shouldn't say easy work, it's super backbreaking and labor intensive, but it's just grunt work. It's not anything that you need any specialized skill for, and you always want to make sure that you're building up the grade. Remember when I said earlier that Manitoba is built on sand and silt, not bedrock? That means our grounds are always moving. They're always settling over time and oftentimes against foundations. So that means every few years what you're going to want to do is do an inspection of your yard, make sure that that grade is built up. It is an ongoing process here for homeowners and something we have to be so proactive about. But if that water is always being directed away from your home and not giving an opportunity to sit up against your foundation and enter the home, you aren't going to have these problems unless there's something more substantially wrong with your property, of course. But it's the best way to keep water out of your property. And then one last tidbit that I've gotten from foundation repair specialists in the area is really that it's a good idea to actually, they call it water your home. So and this isn't all the time, this is depending on the season that you've had, but for instance in 2021 where we had this super dry summer and we started to see the ground pulling away from foundations and forming those air pockets, the recommendation was to water your foundation. Now that doesn't mean hold a hose up to your foundation and let water sink into those cracks. That would actually be the exact opposite of what you want to do. But the recommendation was to about 4 to 5 feet away from the property, just give your home a regular watering. Let that ground kind of expand back to where it was, not so dried and shriveled up away, and add that moisture back into the ground. We saw a lot of cracking in a few years ago actually, where we had an even drier summer than 2021. Houses that had never had cracking in them started to have cracking, and it was because this ground had moved so much from shrinking. The recommendation was to start watering our foundations so that we were adding that moisture back in and getting that correct hydrostatic pressure within the ground. Obviously you have to look at the weather that has been happening and what the ground looks like around your own home. Obviously if it's been, well I shouldn't say obviously, but if it's been a super wet summer and there's excess moisture in the ground and the ground just feels like it's almost sloppy, those are not the seasons where you should be watering your foundation. It's just really in conditions where we notice that shrinkage away from the house and we notice a prolonged period of drought or dry weather. So when it comes to selling your home now after this process of having had water in your foundation, just know that there are going to be a couple disclosure questions in the property disclosure questionnaire that most sellers do complete that just do pertain to water infiltration and seepage. It's not a huge deal. It's fairly common to see these in this disclosure here in Manitoba. But what you're going to want to do is document A, what happened, B, what you did to eradicate the issue, and hopefully you've done something, and then C, whether or not you've experienced that issue since. So something that perhaps happened in 2022, if you're disclosing it in 2025, but you haven't had any continued issues, it's good to have that documentation because then it gives buyers peace of mind that the work you did has alleviated those concerns. But in all honesty, after a winter like we've had and summer of past, it's going to be very common that we see water in basements this year. So I suspect that any good realtor out there will be kind of bracing with their client for that expectation that there's going to be some more dampness in basements this year, and just explain the causes and what can be done for prevention. It doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but people will want to see that you've been proactive if you have had this happen. So just keep that in mind. Again, I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team and RE/MAX Professionals. I hope I didn't bore you with this one today, but I just feel like this is going to be that year where I get a lot of calls about water in basements, and I just wanted to shoot this so that for those of you that perhaps aren't past clients and maybe don't know me yet, that you at least have this information. And of course, if ever you're looking for a realtor in the Winnipeg area, please feel free to reach out. I'm Jennifer Queen with the Jennifer Queen team here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and my contact information will be in the comments section below. And also, if you don't already, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. We are always putting out new content relevant to Winnipeg and its surrounding areas. And also be sure to hit that like button if you found value in this video today. It really does help me in determining just what kind of videos to produce next. Thanks and have a great day, everyone.